So our next topic we are having that is basically the second line of defense. Okay. So as you guys all know, our bodies consist of three line of defense. If a pathogen is there, so they have to cross the first line defense, second line defense, and third line defense. As you guys all know in the previous video, we discussed about the first line defense. So the pathogen has caused the basically not caused but crossed the skin and the mucous membrane. Okay. Now the pathogen in the second line defense. As you guys all know what I'm talking about, the first line defense. If you have watched the previous video, so you will be familiar with that. Okay. So before starting the second line of defense, I want to tell you guys about the reproductive tract that was a part of the first line defense. Okay. So that's very easy. First of all, basically the reproductive tract is also made up of the columnar epithelial cells that basically secrete the mucus, and you can see that the genital organs secrete their secretion, and they secrete because to kill the bacteria. Okay, if the bacteria or pathogens are basically strong, so that can cause a UTI too. You guys will be familiar with what I'm talking about, the UTI. Okay, so now we are starting the second line of defense. So first of all, if we talk about the second line of defense, so what is second line of defense? As you guys all know, it is in the innate immunity, which means that it is by birth. Okay, by birth, and that is non-specific, which means that that will stop all the pathogen, not the targeted pathogen will be stopped. Okay, so we in as you guys all know, in the second line of defense we were having the cellular barrier, which means the cells of our body which basically work in for the immune system. Okay, so first of all, in the cellular barrier we're talking about the killing cells. Okay, so killing cells is having the three major components. First is the, you can say that the killing cell divided into the monocytes, and then basically monocytes divide into the macrophages, and you can say that as a neutrophils, not neutrophils, dendrites. Okay, so if we talk about the dendrites, so dendrites are what? Dendrites are basically, you can say these are also the uh, monocytes also divided into the dendrite, that we'll be discussing too. And the next sector we are having, that is also divided into the neutrophil cells. Okay, neutrophils and natural killing cells. Okay, and there's a third component we are having, the inflammatory response, that will be discussing everything. Okay, and fever. So if we talk about the first one, about the killing cells. Okay, so killing cells are what? They are basically kill the pathogen. Okay, they divide into the monocytes and neutrophils. These are cells. Again, the monocytes are divided into the macrophages and the dendrites. Okay, so in this video we will discuss about the macrophages and the neutrophils. Dendrite in the next video. So if we talk about the monocytes and neutrophils, these both basically are the phagocyte cells, which means that they basically use the process, they basically do the process that is the phagocytosis. Okay, as you guys all know, the phagocytosis, which means that they basically engulf the pathogen and they basically eat that, and they basically kill the pathogen. Okay, so they are phagocytes, which means they are phagocyte cells, and they basically perform a function. That is what? That is the phagocytosis. Okay, after that we are having another function, as you guys all know. So the another function, if you talk about, so if we talk about the monocytes, so the monocytes are basically the agranulocytes. These monocytes are what? These monocytes are basically the agranulocytes. These monocytes are what? Agranulocytes. What does it mean? Agranulocytes, which means that there is the absence of the protein molecule. Okay, there is the absence of the protein molecules. Okay, and if we talk about the monocytes, so monocytes are basically bean shaped in the nucleus. Okay, and if we talk about the further monocytes, so monocytes are basically 2 to 8% of the white blood cell. What are monocytes basically? Monocytes are basically type of the WBC. Okay, so they are basically moved to the lymphoid tissues for the pathogen purpose. Okay, they for the killing of the and if you talk about the monocyte, they basically formed in the stem cells. What are stem cells? These are the precursor cells which divide into the granulocytes or agranulocytes. Okay, if we talk about the originated, they basically originate in the bone marrow. Okay, but they are okay in the bone marrow, but they are formed by the stem cells. And if you talk about the lifespan, so that is 3 to 5 days in blood. Okay, so if the WBC are in blood, we are calling that as the monocytes. Okay, and further they basically mature and they basically occur into the bigger size, so they become macrophages. So as you guys all know, I said you guys what the monocyte divided into the macrophages and dendrocytes. So if they are getting mature, okay, so they are called the macrophages, and macrophages or the dendrite cell. Okay, so now they basically perform the function in the phagocytes. Okay, if we talk about the macrophages, so their lifespan is month or year, depend upon their function. Okay, so let's talk about the macrophages. We have discussed about the monocytes. Now let's talk about the macrophages. So if we talk about the macrophages, so macrophages are basically bigger substance, bigger you can say cells. These are cells. These are the bigger cells which are found by the monocytes, and these basically they are basically macrovods means bigger, phages means eater, which means they eat bigger pathogens. Okay, they can eat more than 100 and at a time they can eat 100 pathogen. Okay, and they are larger than all the WBC. Okay, and if you talk about the nucleus, so their nucleus is horse shoe nucleus, and they are agranulocytes, means they are having no pigment. And if you talk about the monocytes, they were granulocytes. Okay, not granulocytes, agranulocytes, sorry. So that's why they are divided, so they are also agranulocytes. Okay, and if you talk about the phagocytosis, they also do the phagocytosis, which means they basically eat the pathogen, the bigger pathogen, and they are basically divided into the vital organs, which means that the non-lymphatic tissues, like important organ, we are having lungs, liver. Okay, so they basically move into the vital organ. If the macrophage is in the lungs, we are calling that as the alveolar macrophage. If the macrophages are in the liver, we are calling it the Kupffer cell. Okay, if the macrophages are in the immune system, we are calling it the microglia. Okay, and if we talk about if they are in the lymph node, okay, lymph node if they are in, so that lymph nodes are what? These are also the lymphatic tissues which work for the pathogen. And this lymphatic tissues, if they are in the lymphatic tissues, we are calling that the macrophages lymphatic. Okay, basically it perform three function. First function, if we talk about, so they are having the after engulfing, for example, they've engulfed pathogen. Okay, after engulfing, their body basically produce a nitric acid. The body produces a nitric acid chemical to kill the pathogen. Okay, this is the first function. Second function, after killing them, so for example, this is the bacteria and this is the macrophages. So this is the dead body of the bacteria. Okay, so they basically do what? They basically represent this bacteria on their membrane. Okay, from at their membrane, and for that the MHC basically produce. What is MHC? This is the major histocompatibility. So they basically produce MHC, which is the major histocompatibility. Okay, they basically what? MHC basically activate the T cells, and further T cells basically make the antibodies, and these all for the pathogen. Okay, so this was the second function, and if they are representing on the cell wall on the membrane of their macrophages, we are calling as a APCS, which means antigen presenting cells. Okay, to activate the T cells, and after activating of the T cells, what occur? So the immune response will occur. Immune response will occur, which will work in the third line of defense, that we'll be discussing in that. And if we talk about the third function they are having, so they are having the, you can say, they basically release a chemical. The name is not written in our box. Okay, so they basically release a chemical name which basically go through the blood, and they basically affect the monocytes. Okay, for maturation. And again the monocytes basically divide into the macrophages and dendrites. So these processes work again and again. Fourth function, if we talk about, so they basically secrete a interleukin. What is interleukin? This is basically glycoprotein that is released by the macrophages, and they basically move to the hypothalamus to freeze the regulator, and that can cause a fever. So this is basically glycoprotein that basically work in the increasing of fever. And as you guys all know, increasing of fever, so the bacteria work for the our optimum pH, which is 37. So if the body, you can say that temperature is higher, so that bacteria will get, their cell wall will get degenerate, and they will be cause death. So for that the interleukin basically release, which is a, we are also calling that is the pyrexia, which means increasing of the fever. So this was about the macrophages. Now the monocytes were divided into macrophages and the dendrite cells too. Okay, so now we are talking about the dendrite cells. So dendrite cells are basically like this. That's why we are calling that as a dendrite, because of their shape. Okay, and if you talk about the, this is the projection. These are the projection, cytoplasmic projection. Okay, they are having the same thing as the macrophages, but they are having two things different. First is they basically go in the secondary, you can say that lymphatic tissues. Okay, but macrophages were going into the non-lymphatic tissues, which means the vital organs for the eating the pathogen. But they basically go into secondary lymphatic, which means tonsils are there, spleen is there. Okay, pages is there for the killing of purpose of the pathogen. Okay, so it works same as engulfing. Okay, they basically do the phagocytosis, and they basically produce the MHC2 like the macrophages, and then T killer cell will produce, and the immune response will produce. Okay, so they only do one time phagocytosis, one time phagocytes. Okay, after they basically kill the pathogen by the lysosome, and they basically become dead. So their lifespan is basically very short as compared to the macrophages. Okay, so as the T cells will be stimulated, they basically do the one time phagocytosis, and they basically after that they kill. So they basically produce a lysosome hydrolytic enzyme that is very poisonous to kill the bacteria and to produce the MHC. So that was about the dendrite cells, and their lifespan is very short. So this was about the, you can say that second line of defense we have discussed. So in the next video we have discussed only the killing cells, monocytes that are divided into the macrophages and dendrites. Now the neutrophils are remaining, and natural killer cells are also remaining. So that we'll be discussing in the next video. So this is the part 1 of the second line of defense.